Hello everyone, I'm Aaron, a birding naturalist. Welcome to my channel. Well, it's about the winter solstice, shortest day of the year up here in the northern hemisphere. And with those cold time of year, 'tis the season to talk about one of the symbols of the season, and that is this stuff. And all these clusters up in the street behind me, those things. Mistletoe. So, mistletoe is a really interesting plant, actually. It is often associated with various winter holidays because it stays green all the time. So it's sort of a symbol of lasting life, rebirth, rejuvenation, etc., etc. Which is kind of where the tradition of kissing under the mistletoe comes from. But as a plant, in its own right, in its own sort of biology, it's actually a pretty interesting plant for a lot of reasons. One is it is a parasite. This is one of the reasons why it's able to stay green all year long, is it actually taps into and steals nutrients from a host plant. So for example, behind me, there's a big cottonwood tree, and it's got these big clusters of mistletoe growing off it. So this cluster of mistletoe is actually tapping into and taking nutrients out of that cottonwood tree. Now, when we talk about mistletoe, it actually is interesting that there are about 1,500 different species of mistletoe all around the world. They're found on pretty much every continent except Antarctica, and they have a bunch of different sort of levels of parasitism. Some of them are very, very parasitic, where they take pretty much all of their nutrients from their host tree. Some of them take some nutrients, certainly, but also generate their own nutrients to a certain extent as well. Also, this changes. Very young, when a mistletoe plant is just a baby, it's just starting to grow, it often supplies all of its own nutrients until it can grow into the parent sort of host plant and start stealing nutrients. So in the early life, they're not really parasitic at all, but then later on in life, they become parasitic. So there's a huge range of variation in these 1,500 different species across the various life stages of what we call mistletoe. And you know, while these are generally parasitic on the plants that they grow on, which means they take nutrients from it and they don't really give much back, they are really useful for a lot of other species. Many birds eat the berries, the fruits of mistletoe. In fact, it's often an important food source, especially in the wintertime when maybe there aren't a lot of other food sources available. There are also many species that nest in the really dense clusters, right? Those big clusters up there, those big clusters form some really cool habitat that many species of birds take advantage of. So, very useful for other members of the ecosystem other than the host plant. And actually, it turns out that even the host plants can actually get some level of benefit from having mistletoe around. And so this is where the dichotomy between being a parasite and being not a parasite gets a little wishy-washy. Because something interesting happens with mistletoes, especially in juniper forests. People have found that in juniper forests, when there is sort of a moderate level of mistletoe clustering on juniper trees, that actually there ends up being more juniper seedlings growing in that forest. So what happens is the mistletoes, with all of their berries, act as sort of an attractant to a lot of bird species. The birds come in for the mistletoe, but then they stay for the juniper berries. And so they'll eat both and end up flying around, pooping out the berries, and causing a lot more juniper forest regeneration to take place than if there is no mistletoe there. But there is sort of a sweet spot. If there's no mistletoe, the trees don't get this benefit, right? If there's sort of a moderate amount of mistletoe, it works really well. If there gets to be a lot of mistletoe, though, it becomes problematic, because if you have a lot of mistletoe on a single given tree, they are pulling nutrients from that tree and they can weaken it. They can weaken it to the point where they can kill it, or they can make it more susceptible to other stressors, other issues. Things like diseases, drought, that kind of thing. Which brings me to a question that some people have about mistletoe, and that is, well, how much is too much? What do we do about it? What should we do about it? What can we do about it? So, unfortunately, that is too big and complicated a question with too many variables to really come up with a specific answer. But generally, the guideline is about a healthy, decent-sized tree can pretty easily handle 15 to even 20 clusters of mistletoe growing off of it. So if you have a tree in your backyard and it's got 15-ish, 20-ish clusters of mistletoe, that's sort of probably okay. If it gets much more than that, that's where other factors start to come in and it might be a problem. But really the thing to do is, if you have a tree that you're particularly worried about, is to contact an arborist. Because depending on the size of the tree, depending on the size of the mistletoe, depending on the overall age of the tree and the health of the tree, different factors can come in and really change how impactful the mistletoe is being as a parasite on the sort of health of that tree. Luckily though, mistletoe spreads fairly slowly and it grows fairly slowly. So it's not one of these parasites that quickly overwhelms its host and can be devastating and spread to tons and tons of other hosts. So it's a much more sort of, ecologically balanced parasite. The way it does spread, it spreads not wildly fast, but it does spread usually by birds. All those birds that come to eat the berries, well, they either eat the berries and poop them out somewhere else, or they eat the berries and the berries can be pretty sticky. And so the seeds can get stuck on the side of the bird's bill, and then when it flies off somewhere and wipes its bill off on a branch, those seeds can stick to the branch. And either pooped out or bill wiped, however they get there, once those seeds stick to the branch, then they start to grow, they germinate, and put out some leaves, and then start growing into the bark of the tree towards its cambium, its sort of nutrient-rich tissue, so that it can start pulling nutrients out to survive its life cycle. So a pretty fun plant, a pretty interesting plant, a plant with some really interesting ecological implications to it, and a really fun one to talk about at this time of year. So I hope you all have wonderful, happy holidays, enjoy the solstice, happy new year, etc., etc., etc. I hope you can appreciate some mistletoe next time you see it. And until next time, thank you very much for the view, and enjoy the natural world.